Hello and welcome to the screencast. Today we're going to demonstrate the use of vCloud metadata as policy descriptors that we use to automate actions inside of our cloud. In this case, we'll be using vCloud metadata to describe policy that will be used to configure VCNS app security groups. So right now I'm logged into vCloud Director as an ordinary vApp user. Now this particular user is meant to represent a somewhat more technical role. This might be a DevOps manager or a security manager, but someone that requires access to the richer interface and configuration options that are provided through vCloud Director. In this particular case, we have content in the catalog that has been provided for us, and this content has been pre-configured with certain metadata. In our particular case, we have metadata tags that have been defined on VMs to represent the VCNS app security groups. This has been done for us by either a cloud administrator or perhaps a security manager in advance in preparation for us to consume. So we're going to start off by deploying a vApp from the catalog. And here's the gold master. We have a VCNS-app-v2. This is the vApp that we want to deploy. And really this vApp is meant to model a simple two-tier application with a web server and a database server. We'll put our database server on tier 1 storage. And we're going to add the web server and the database server to an organization virtual data center network. And we'll deploy the vApp. A couple things to note about the vApp while it's deploying is that we're simply consuming what is in the catalog. Any metadata that has been defined in the objects in the catalog will get deployed with our copy inside of our cloud environment. And let's take a quick look at some of the metadata that we've used. So we go to the virtual machine tabs here. We'll look at our database server, and we'll look at the metadata that's been defined. As you can see here, we have a metadata tag with the name of VCNS-app-SG. This is an arbitrary name that we chose to represent a security group in VCNS app. For the value, we've defined the desired security group that we're saying this VM must be a member of as a matter of our security policy. Looking at the web VM, we see something similar. We have the same name, VCNS-app-SG, to represent our security group, and this time a value of web to correspond to the web security group that we would like to apply. I'll go back to our home page. Let's turn on this vApp, start the vApp, and see what happens. Notice it goes into a pending processing state. It's in a pending processing state because the vApp deploy or start task is blocking. A blocking task is something that enables a third-party system to evaluate certain conditions before letting the task resume, or potentially not resume if that's what we desire. I'll refresh our view here. Notice it's running now. So in our case, there's an additional requirement of a metadata that we need to define on the vApp itself in order to instruct our cloud to process the metadata that's been defined on the VMs. So in this case, no work has been performed. When we started up the vApp, it simply started up. I want to take a quick look at our vShield Manager configuration. Refresh the view here quick. So notice here we have two security groups. We have a database security group and a web security group, meant to represent collections of objects that correspond to the vCloud metadata that we just looked at. So what we're going to do now is deploy a second copy of this vApp, but this time we're actually going to define a piece of metadata to instruct our cloud to process the metadata on the VMs themselves. Like before, we'll put our database on tier 1 storage. And we'll put the VMs in the vApp on an organization virtual data center network. We'll click Finish to deploy the VApp. Now that our VApp has been created, there's an additional step we'll take. We'll go into the properties of the VApp and its metadata. Now notice there's no metadata currently defined on the VApp, nor was there any metadata defined in the VApp template on the VApp itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a specific tag here called vcns.app.policy.apply. We'll set this value to true. What this is going to do is instruct our cloud to apply the policy that's contained inside the VApp, namely the metadata defined on the VMs. Now, how would we know what this piece of metadata is? Well, we know because it's been supplied to us by either our cloud administrator or by a security administrator, someone that has knowledge of this particular implementation. Because we're in the Cloud Director interface, we have the ability to do things like define metadata via the UI. Let's go ahead and start this VApp and see what happens now. Notice that it goes into the pending processing state, again, because the deploy VApp task is blocked. Let's refresh our view here. Now notice we have a new thing here, VCO applying VCNS policy. That's because in our case, the external system that is evaluating the block task is VCO. In this case, it's telling us that it's applying the VCNS policy because it found the piece of metadata we just added to the VApp. If we go back over to vShield Manager, let's refresh our security group views. And notice now that we have VMs that have been populated inside of the security groups that we defined earlier. So we've dynamically adjusted the membership of these security groups based on our metadata tags. Well, that's great, but what exactly do these security groups do? Let's take a look at our app firewall configuration. Recall that we're attempting to illustrate a simple two-tier application use case. So we've defined a few firewall rules to reflect that. The first firewall rule that we've defined allows any source to contact anything in the web security group via typical HTTP traffic. Secondly, we've defined a rule that allows any web server to communicate to any database server via its database port, in this case Oracle 1521, and also we've added SSH to the rule. SSH in this case is really to help us demonstrate our use case here. Lastly, we've added a rule to block any other traffic sourced from anywhere to either one of these destinations. So these three rules essentially provide the entire set of traffic allowed to this environment, to this collection of these two-tier applications. Let's go back to Cloud Director and let's refresh our view. And we can see now that our VApp is running. Let's go ahead and open our VApp. And on the virtual machine tabs here, we have a couple of IP addresses. So now let's take a moment to demonstrate that our policy actually works. First, we'll try to ping the web server. And that doesn't work. That's good because that's prohibited by our policy. Next, we're going to try to ping the database server. Again, that fails. It's not allowed by our policy. And then we'll make one more attempt here to communicate with these servers. In this case, SSH to the database server. And notice it's not connecting. Eventually, this attempt will time out. To show you that our policy actually does work, let's open up our web server. We're going to connect to the console. So logging into our console. Let's try to ping our database server. And notice we're not able to. So we see 100% packet loss. That's good because it's not allowed by our policy. Lastly, let's try to SSH to our database server. This is something we've allowed in our policy, so we expect it to succeed, and it does. So here I'm logged into the database server. One more thing I'd like to show is that these rules can clean up after themselves as well. So we have our VApp running. We'll say that we're done with it for now, so let's go ahead and stop the VApp. Notice it goes back into the pending processing state. Now this is because the stop action is also a blocking task. We'll refresh our view here. And notice we've updated the progress to provide some feedback in the UI indicating that the vCNS policy is being removed. If we go back to vShield Manager, back to the General tab, and back to Groupings, notice now that the security group membership that we had previously added has been removed. So in this particular case, we've demonstrated how we can leverage vCloud metadata as a policy descriptor and as a mechanism to trigger policy processing within our cloud environment using VCO. Now, this is all well and good, but it required some additional knowledge. For example, there was a piece of metadata that we needed to obtain from a cloud administrator or a security administrator. So what if we wanted to apply that policy in a more automated fashion with more governance? That's where vCloud Automation Center comes in. vCloud Automation Center allows us to define when particular policies are applied, to whom they apply, and for which entities they apply. So let's take a quick look at vCloud Automation Center. So here's the vCloud Automation Center user console. Here I'm logged in as a regular user. This particular user maybe is just a member of the development team or a QA team, and really just needs to request machines to do their job. This person will have much less knowledge about vCloud Director than our previous role would, where we're actually in the VCD UI. So we have a more simplified user interface, and notice here I have one blueprint that I'm entitled to. Let's click on New Request, and notice here I have a two-tier application. I can see from the description there's a web and database server in here with some vCNS policy applied. We'll look at more about that in a second. Let's go ahead and request one of these machines. One machine. For description, we'll say this is the new application, and I need to do some QA testing. Click Submit. So now I've requested a machine. So notice there was no additional policy that I needed to apply to request this particular machine. That's been done for us in vCloud Automation Center. So let's look a little bit more into how that works. So switching now, this is the administrative console for vCloud Automation Center. I'm logged in as a user that is a provisioning group manager for the provisioning group that this particular blueprint that we just requested machine from is associated with. So let's take a look at this blueprint and how it differs from a standard template in vCloud Director. Switching to the Build Information tab, notice that the VApp template we've defined here in the Clone From field is vCNS-app-v2. This should look familiar because this is the same VApp template that we deployed from our catalog from the vCloud Director interface. In addition, we've applied a build profile. A build profile is a collection of custom properties. And looking at the build profile, there's two of interest. Notice the vcns.app.policy.apply custom property. This also should look familiar because this is the same piece of metadata that we use to instruct our cloud to process the policy descriptors that we had defined on the VMs. We set that value to true. There's an additional property here called properties.vcns.transfer.vcloud, and this particular custom property is used in the vCloud Automation Center workflow to tell vCloud Automation Center to take any properties related to VCNS and transfer them to vCloud as metadata. So where before we had to add the metadata manually, now we're doing it in an automated fashion. Let's switch back to our interface. And notice the initial power on has occurred. So at this point, everything that happened before in vCloud Director should have taken place with no additional intervention from the end user. We did not need to apply additional metadata. We didn't need to know the details about the policies. So let's take a look and see whether that's actually the case. If we go back to vShield Manager and our security groups, let's refresh. And notice here we have two new VMs. These particular VMs are part of the machine request from vCloud Automation Center. So in this screencast, we have demonstrated how we can use vCloud metadata as policy descriptors and as mechanisms to trigger the enforcement of policy in our cloud environment. Also, we've shown how vCloud Automation Center allows you to apply more governance around the application of policy in your cloud environment. Thank you for watching.